Hi, my name's Dominic Shaw, and the night my in-laws threw me out of their estate, calling me a gold digger in front of 50 guests, I didn't defend myself. I didn't tell them about the tech patents worth millions, or the investment portfolio they'd never heard of. My father-in-law pointed at the door and said I'd married his daughter for money. My mother-in-law called me a parasite. They thought I was nothing, a broke nobody who got lucky. But I didn't argue. I walked out into the rain with nothing but my dignity and a secret they'd never seen coming. What they didn't know was that their daughter, my wife, had made one decision before she died that would change everything. She knew who I really was. She knew what I'd built in silence. And when they finally discovered the truth, it wasn't just shock on their faces. It was the crushing weight of their own arrogance collapsing around them. This is the story of how their greed destroyed them, and how I never had to say a word. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The rain had been threatening all evening, clouds gathering over Ashford Heights like a dark omen. By the time I pulled up to the Whitmore estate, the first drops were already spattering against my windshield. The mansion stood illuminated against the darkening sky, every window glowing with warm light, music drifting out from the ballroom where my in-laws were hosting their annual charity gala. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the ornate iron gates. Something felt off. My wife Sienna had been gone for 3 months now, taken by a sudden aneurysm that gave us no time to say goodbye. 3 months of grief, 3 months of silence from her family, and then suddenly this invitation to attend their gala, written on expensive cardstock, delivered by courier, formal and cold. I should have known better. The valet took my keys without meeting my eyes. I noticed that immediately. Inside the marble foyer, conversation seemed to pause as I entered. Eyes turned, whispers followed. The Whitmore family had spared no expense tonight. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across the crowd. A string quartet played in the corner. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvre. I spotted Richard Whitmore first, Sienna's father, holding court near the grand staircase. Tall, silver-haired, commanding, he wore his wealth like armor, every gesture calculated to remind people of his status. Beside him stood Eleanor, Sienna's mother, elegant in a navy gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her smile was practiced, perfect, and completely empty. I made my way toward them, weaving through clusters of Charleston's elite, lawyers, politicians, old money families who'd known each other for generations. I'd never fit into this world, and they'd made sure I knew it from the moment Sienna brought me home. "Dominic," Richard said when I approached. His voice carried across the conversation, loud enough to draw attention. "So glad you could make it." There was something in his tone, something sharp beneath the civility. "Thank you for the invitation," I replied quietly. Eleanor's eyes swept over me, taking in my simple black suit. Not expensive enough. Not tailored enough. I could see the judgment in her gaze, the same look she'd given me at my wedding, at every family gathering, every holiday dinner, the look that said I didn't belong. "We thought it was time to address certain matters," Richard continued. He set down his champagne glass with a deliberate clink. "Publicly." My stomach tightened. Around us, conversations were fading. People were turning to watch. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," I suggested. "No," Eleanor said coldly. "I think everyone here should know exactly what kind of man you are." The ballroom had gone quiet now. 50, maybe 60 people, all watching. The quartet had stopped playing. Richard stepped closer, his voice rising. "My daughter was worth $20 million, Dominic. $20 million in trust funds, property, investments. And she married you." He said it like an accusation. A man with no family name, no pedigree, working some middling job in tech support. "I loved Sienna," I said quietly. "Money had nothing to do with it." "Loved her?" Eleanor's laugh was brittle, cruel. "You saw an opportunity, a wealthy, lonely woman who'd believe your sweet words and empty promises." I felt the blood draining from my face. Not from shame, but from the sheer cruelty of it. Sienna had been dead for 3 months, and they were doing this. Here, now, in front of all these people. "You married her for her money," Richard declared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You're nothing but a gold digger, a parasite, who latched onto our family. Someone in the crowd gasped. I heard whispers spreading like wildfire. "That's not true," I said. But my voice was too quiet, too steady. They wanted emotion. They wanted me to break down, to shout, to prove their point. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Eleanor stepped forward, her heels clicking on the marble. "We've had investigators looking into you, Dominic. We know you were struggling financially when you met Sienna. Student loans, credit card debt, living in that pathetic apartment in Brookhaven. She wasn't wrong. I had been struggling, most people were, but I'd also been building something, quietly, carefully, something they knew nothing about. Sienna saw something in me," I said, "something real. She saw a charity case," Richard shot back, "and being the kind-hearted fool she was, she tried to save you." The words hit like physical blows. I thought of Sienna, of her laugh, her intelligence, the way she'd supported my work even when I couldn't tell her everything, the way she'd believed in me when I barely believed in myself. "You used her," Eleanor hissed. "And now that she's gone, you probably think you're entitled to her inheritance." I took a slow breath. I never asked Sienna for anything. "But you took plenty," Richard said. He gestured broadly to the crowd. "This man lived in our daughter's penthouse, drove cars she bought, wore clothes she paid for, all while pretending to be some kind of devoted husband." My jaw clenched. I wanted to tell them about the patents I held, the software I'd developed, the investments that had quietly grown over the past 8 years. But something stopped me. Pride, maybe, or the realization that it wouldn't matter. They'd already made up their minds. "We want you out," Eleanor said flatly. "Out of Sienna's apartment. Out of our lives. You have until Monday to remove your belongings." "That's my home," I said quietly. "It was never your home," Richard corrected. "It was Sienna's. And now it belongs to her estate, which we control." The room was spinning, not from shock but from the sheer audacity of it. They were doing this here, publicly, to humiliate me, to make sure everyone in their social circle knew I was being cast out. "Security will change the locks on Monday morning," Eleanor added. "If you're not out by then, we'll have you removed." I looked at both of them. Really looked at them. These people who'd raised Sienna, who were supposed to love her, were so consumed by their own bitterness and class prejudice that they couldn't see what they were doing. They couldn't see who I really was. But I didn't tell them. I didn't explain. I didn't defend myself. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my car keys. The valet ticket was attached to a simple leather strap, worn and frayed. Nothing expensive. Nothing impressive. "You're right about one thing," I said softly, so only they could hear. "I'm not part of your world. I never wanted to be." I turned and walked toward the door. The crowd parted silently. I could feel their eyes on my back, hear the whispers starting up again. Gold digger, parasite, opportunist. Let them think what they wanted. Outside, the rain had started in earnest, heavy drops that soaked through my suit jacket within seconds. The valet brought my car around. A modest sedan, nothing like the luxury vehicles that filled the circular driveway. He handed me the keys without a word, but I saw pity in his eyes. I drove away slowly, watching the Whitmore estate shrink in my rearview mirror. The mansion glowed like a beacon, full of people who thought they knew everything, who thought wealth was the only measure of worth. They had no idea what Sienna had known, what she'd discovered about me in the quiet moments when it was just us, when titles and bank accounts didn't matter. They had no idea what she'd done to protect what we'd built together. The rain hammered against the windshield as I drove through the empty streets of Ashford Heights, past the manicured lawns and gated communities. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't need the noise. The sound of the storm was enough. I had one stop to make before I disappeared from their lives forever. The drive to Harborside took 40 minutes through the storm. The GPS guided me down unfamiliar roads, away from the expensive neighborhoods, and toward the industrial waterfront. Most people never came to this part of the city unless they worked at the shipping yards or the old textile factories that had been converted into loft apartments. I pulled up to a nondescript building on Maritime Avenue, its brick facade weathered by decades of salt air and neglect. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. The small brass plaque near the entrance read simply, "Quantum Dynamics Holdings, Suite 7. I keyed in the security code and slipped inside before the rain could follow me. The lobby was sparse but clean, nothing flashy, just functional. I took the elevator to the 7th floor, my wet shoes squeaking against the polished concrete. When the doors opened, I was home. My real home. The loft space stretched out before me, open and modern. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the harbor, where container ships sat dark against the storm-lit sky. Exposed brick walls, minimalist furniture, a sleek kitchen island that I'd actually used, unlike the showpiece in Sienna's penthouse. This place had always felt more like me, quiet, efficient, unpretentious. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I dropped my keys on the entry table and stood there for a moment, dripping rainwater onto the mat. My hands were shaking. Not from cold, but from everything I'd been holding back at the gala. 3 months. 3 months since I'd lost Sienna, and tonight was the first time her parents had acknowledged my existence since the funeral. Not to offer condolences or support, but to publicly destroy me. I walked to the window and stared out at the rain-swept harbor. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the cranes and cargo containers. This view had always calmed me. Sienna used to joke that I was part of 2 different worlds, her glittering penthouse in the sky, and my industrial sanctuary by the water. She was the only one who knew about this place, the only one who understood why I needed it. I moved to my desk, a custom-built standing workstation with 3 monitors that hummed to life at my touch. While Richard and Eleanor had been cataloging my supposed failures tonight, they had no idea what these screens represented, what I'd been building for the past decade. I opened the encrypted folder labeled Project Artemis. Inside were documents that would make their 20 million look like pocket change. Patents for predictive algorithm technology that 3 major tech companies were currently bidding on. Licensing agreements that generated passive income most people couldn't imagine. Investment portfolios that had weathered every market downturn and emerged stronger. I had started coding in college, back when I was living on ramen and student loans. Not because I wanted to be rich, but because I loved solving problems, creating elegant solutions to complex challenges. The money came later, almost by accident, when a small app I'd built caught the attention of a venture capital firm. I'd sold that first company for $3 million. I was 26 years old. But I didn't broadcast it, didn't buy a sports car, or move into a luxury condo. I paid off my debts, invested carefully, and kept working. Kept building. By the time I met Sienna at a tech conference in Boston, I had enough money to never work again if I chose. But I kept that quiet too. Sienna figured it out eventually. She was too smart not to. She noticed the calls I'd take late at night, the business trips I'd make to Silicon Valley and Austin, the way I'd casually discuss market trends and emerging technologies with a depth that didn't match my supposed job in tech support. One night about a year after we were married, she'd looked at me over dinner and said, "You're not really in tech support, are you?" I'd smiled. "No." "Are you going to tell me what you actually do?" "If you want to know." She'd thought about it for a long moment, then shook her head. "I married you because of who you are, not what you do. If you want to tell me, tell me. If not, I trust you." That was Sienna. She understood that some people needed privacy, needed space to be themselves without the weight of expectations. Her parents had spent her entire life trying to control her through money and social pressure. She'd fought hard to maintain her independence, and she respected mine. Eventually, I did tell her. Showed her this loft, the patents, the investments. She'd been stunned, then amused, then deeply thoughtful. "Does this mean I'm the gold digger?" she'd joked. We'd laughed about it, but there was truth beneath the humor. Her parents had always assumed I was after her money, never considering that I might have my own, that I might have chosen her for reasons that had nothing to do with her trust fund. I pulled up another folder, this one labeled estate documents. My attorney, Victoria Chen, had sent these over 2 weeks after Sienna's death. I'd been too grief-stricken to look at them properly at the time, just signed what needed signing and filed them away. Now I read them carefully. Sienna had updated her will 6 months before she died. I remembered her mentioning it casually, saying she wanted to make sure everything was organized. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. We were young, death seemed distant, but she'd been thorough, meticulous even. The penthouse in Ashford Heights, the one her parents were so eager to kick me out of, it was titled in her name, yes, but the mortgage had been paid off years ago by a trust her grandmother had established. According to the terms of that trust, the property would pass to Sienna's spouse upon her death, not to her parents. Richard and Eleanor could change the locks all they wanted. The apartment was legally mine. But that wasn't the interesting part. I scrolled further, past the real estate holdings and personal effects, until I found the section labeled Primary Beneficiary Designation. My breath caught. Sienna had made me the sole beneficiary of her entire estate. Not just the penthouse, everything. The investment accounts her father had mentioned. The portfolio of commercial properties in downtown Ashford. The shares in Whitmore Industries, the family business that Richard had built into a regional powerhouse. $20 million, all of it mine. But there was more. Attached to the will was a letter, scanned and digitized by Victoria's office, Sienna's handwriting, familiar and precious. Dominic, it began, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I'm so sorry. Sorry to leave you alone, sorry you have to deal with my family without me there to run interference. My eyes burned. I could hear her voice in every word. I know my parents will make this difficult. They've never understood you, never tried to. They see the world through the lens of social status and family legacy, and anyone who doesn't fit their narrow definition of success might as well be invisible. But I see you. I've always seen you. I know about quantum dynamics. I know about the patents and the investments. I found the documents in your desk drawer about 6 months ago, by accident. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for stamps, I swear. I smiled despite everything. That was so Sienna. I didn't tell you I knew because I understood why you kept it quiet. You wanted to be loved for yourself, not for what you could provide. My whole life, people have wanted something from me. My name, my connections, my money. You were the first person who just wanted me. So I'm leaving you everything. Not because you need it, you probably have more than I do at this point, but because I want you to have it. Because it's the only way I know to show my parents that they were wrong about you. That I trusted you completely. That you were the best thing that ever happened to me. Don't let them bully you, Dominic. Stand your ground. You're stronger than you think. I love you. Always. The letter ended with her signature, slightly crooked, just like always. I sat back in my chair, the weight of it settling over me. Sienna had known. She'd known what her parents would do, how they'd react, and she'd made sure I had the means to fight back if I chose to. But did I want to? I thought about Richard's face tonight, twisted with contempt. Eleanor's cold dismissal. The way they'd humiliated me in front of their entire social circle, not caring that I was grieving, not caring that I'd loved their daughter more than anything in the world. They thought I was nothing. They thought they could throw me out and erase me from Sienna's life like I'd never existed. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Saw what happened tonight. Are you okay? This is Victoria Chen, by the way, Sienna's attorney. We should talk. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, tomorrow, your office, 9 a.m. Her response came quickly, I'll be ready. Bring the estate documents. I set the phone down and returned to the window. The storm was passing, clouds breaking apart to reveal patches of clear sky. The harbor lights reflected off the wet pavement, creating rivers of gold and silver. Sienna had given me a choice. I could walk away, take what was mine, and disappear into the comfortable anonymity I'd built for myself. Or I could stand my ground. Show Richard and Eleanor exactly who they'd underestimated. I thought about Sienna's letter. Don't let them bully you. I wouldn't. But I also wouldn't do it their way. No public confrontations, no shouting matches, no dramatic reveals. That wasn't who I was. I'd do it quietly, methodically, the same way I'd built everything else in my life. And by the time they realized what was happening, it would be too late. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my desk and made a list. Not of revenge tactics or confrontational strategies, but of logistics. Practical steps that needed to be taken. Years of building businesses had taught me that emotion was the enemy of clear thinking. If I was going to do this, I needed to approach it like any other complex problem. Break it down, identify the variables, execute with precision. By dawn, I had a plan. First item, communication blackout. I opened my phone and systematically began disconnecting from the world the Whitmores inhabited. I deleted my LinkedIn profile, the one that listed my vague job in tech support. My Facebook account, rarely used but still active, went next. Instagram, Twitter, even the neighborhood app for Ashford Heights, where Sienna's penthouse was located. Every digital footprint that connected me to their social circle, gone. I drafted emails to the handful of mutual acquaintances Sienna and I had accumulated, people who'd sent condolence cards or awkward messages after her death. The message was simple, polite, final. Thank you for your kindness during this difficult time. I'm taking some space to grieve privately. Please don't try to reach out. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. Then I disabled those email accounts entirely. My work email, the real one connected to quantum dynamics, remained active, but that existed in a completely separate sphere, one Richard and Eleanor had no knowledge of. As far as they knew, I was just some low-level IT worker who'd gotten lucky by marrying their daughter. Let them keep thinking that. Next, I pulled up the security system for this loft. I'd installed it myself 3 years ago. Commercial-grade cameras and motion sensors that fed directly to encrypted cloud storage. I adjusted the settings, increasing sensitivity, adding facial recognition protocols. If anyone came looking for me here, I'd know about it long before they reached my door. Not that they would. The building's lease was held through a shell company, 3 layers of legal separation between my name and this address. Even if they hired investigators, which Eleanor had already implied they'd done, they'd hit dead ends. By 8 a.m. I'd showered, changed into fresh clothes, and driven across town to Victoria Chen's office. She practiced out of a renovated brownstone in the Merchant District, the kind of place that screamed old money and discretion. Exactly the kind of attorney someone like Sienna would choose. Victoria was waiting in her conference room, a woman in her mid-50s with sharp eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. She stood when I entered, extending her hand. "Dominic, I'm glad you came. You said we should talk." She gestured to a chair. "I heard about what happened at the gala. Word travels fast in certain circles." I sat down, placing my briefcase on the table. "I'm sure it does. Richard and Eleanor Whitmore are making a lot of noise about contesting the will," Victoria said bluntly. "They're claiming undue influence, arguing that Sienna wasn't in her right mind when she made you the primary beneficiary." "She updated her will 6 months before she died," I pointed out. "She was perfectly healthy, completely lucid." "I know, and they know. But grief makes people irrational, and pride makes them vindictive." Victoria pulled out a thick folder. "They've already contacted 3 different law firms. So far, no one's agreed to take the case. The will is airtight, but they're persistent." I opened my briefcase and slid Sienna's letter across the table. She knew this would happen. Victoria read it carefully, her expression softening. When she finished, she set it down gently. "She loved you very much." "I loved her too." The words came out rougher than I intended. "Then let's make sure her wishes are honored." Victoria pulled out another document. "First thing we need to do is secure the penthouse. Richard sent notice that they're changing the locks on Monday." "Can they do that?" "No. The property transferred to you automatically upon Sienna's death. They have no legal authority to lock you out of your own home." She made a note. "I'll file an injunction this afternoon. If they change those locks, they'll be in contempt." "I don't want to live there," I said quietly. Victoria looked up, surprised. "You don't?" I shook my head. That was Sienna's space, her style, her memories. I have my own place. "The loft in Harborside." I raised an eyebrow. "You know about that?" "I'm thorough." She smiled slightly. "Sienna mentioned it once. Said you had a private workspace where you did your real work. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't pry." I relaxed marginally. If Victoria knew about the loft and hadn't mentioned it to the Whitmores, I could trust her discretion. "If you don't want the penthouse, we should consider selling it," Victoria suggested. "The market in Ashford Heights is strong. You could easily get $4 million, maybe more." "Not yet," I said. "Let them think they won that battle. Let them think I'm scrambling, displaced, exactly what they expect." Victoria studied me for a long moment. "You're not planning to fight them publicly, are you?" "No." "Good." She leaned back. "Public battles get messy. They attract media attention, damage reputations on both sides. Better to handle this quietly." That's always been my preference. We spent the next 2 hours going through every aspect of Sienna's estate. The investment accounts, the commercial properties, the shares in Whitmore Industries. Victoria had already filed all the necessary probate documents, but the Whitmores were dragging their feet on releasing certain assets, particularly the company shares. "They're trying to freeze you out," Victoria explained. "Make it difficult enough that you'll accept a settlement, some fraction of what you're owed, just to be done with it." How long can they delay? Months, if they're creative. Maybe a year. I considered this. And if I don't engage? If I just disappear? Victoria's eyes sharpened. What do you mean? I mean, what if I go completely silent? No lawyers, no demands, no contact, just vanish from their world entirely. She thought about it. They'd probably assume you gave up, that the fight was too expensive or too complicated. They might even think you fled the city. Good. But Dominic, you'd be giving up leverage. Silence can be powerful, but only if there's an eventual reveal. If you disappear permanently, they win by default. I'm not disappearing permanently, I assured her. I'm just going dark while we prepare. Let them think I'm gone. Let them get comfortable. Then we move. Victoria smiled, a predator's smile. I like the way you think. What do you need from me? File the injunction on the penthouse, but do it quietly. No press, no drama. Continue the probate process at normal speed. Don't rush, don't delay. And keep track of everything they do. Every move they make, every asset they try to hide or manipulate. I want documentation. Consider it done, she paused. Can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Why did you keep your success hidden from them, from everyone? I thought about how to answer that. Because the moment people know you have money, that's all they see. Every interaction becomes transactional. Every relationship suspect. I wanted Sienna to love me for who I was, not what I had. And she did. Yes, she did. Victoria gathered her documents. I'll stay in touch through encrypted email only. If they're watching you, and I suspect they are, we can't afford any obvious communication. I stood to leave, then paused. One more thing. Can you find out who they hired to investigate me? I can try. Why? Because I want to know what they think they know. Information is leverage. She nodded. I'll see what I can dig up. I left her office and drove back to Harborside, through mid-morning traffic. The city looked different in daylight, less dramatic than it had during last night's storm, but no less real. People going about their lives, unaware of the quiet war being waged in legal offices and estate disputes. Back at the loft, I made coffee and stood at the window again. It had become a ritual, this looking out at the harbor, finding calm in the steady rhythm of ships coming and going, cargo being loaded and unloaded, everything in its time, everything with purpose. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Marcus, Sienna's cousin. Heard what happened at the gala. That was brutal, man. Just wanted you to know not everyone in the family thinks you're a gold digger. Hang in there. I stared at the message. Marcus Whitmore, Sienna's younger cousin, maybe late 20s. I'd met him a handful of times at family gatherings. He'd always seemed uncomfortable with the family's pretensions, preferring to talk about music and travel rather than business and social climbing. I didn't respond. Couldn't risk it. Even well-meaning relatives could leak information, intentionally or not. Instead, I deleted the message and blocked the number. Over the next week, I received 17 more attempts at contact. Text messages, emails that somehow found their way to old accounts, even a handwritten letter forwarded from Sienna's penthouse. Some were supportive, like Marcus's message. Others were viciously cruel, people I'd never met telling me I was a disgrace, a leech, that I'd probably killed Sienna for her money. I read them all once, cataloged them in a folder, then archived them without response. Silence. It was harder than I'd expected. Every instinct screamed to defend myself, to correct the record, to show them proof of who I really was. But I resisted. This wasn't about winning arguments. It was about winning the war. Victoria sent daily updates through our encrypted channel. The Whitmores had indeed hired investigators, a firm called Apex Research Group, expensive and thorough. They traced my employment history, my college records, my credit score from 5 years ago. Everything pointed to exactly what Richard and Eleanor wanted to believe, that I was a struggling nobody who'd married into money. What they hadn't found was quantum dynamics, the shell companies, the patents, the investments. Because I'd built those walls carefully, brick by brick, over years of deliberate planning, not to hide illegal activity, but to protect my privacy in a world that increasingly had none. On day 9 of my self-imposed exile, Victoria sent a message that made me smile. Ari changed the penthouse locks this morning despite injunction. Currently in contempt of court. Judge is not pleased. Hearing scheduled for Friday. This could get interesting. Richard Whitmore, so used to getting his way, had overplayed his hand. The judge overseeing Sienna's probate case was known for taking a dim view of wealthy families who thought rules didn't apply to them. I didn't attend the hearing. Didn't need to. Victoria handled it flawlessly. The result, Richard was ordered to provide me immediate access to the penthouse and fined $15,000 for contempt. The local legal blog even ran a small item about it, carefully worded to avoid defamation, but making it clear that a prominent family had gotten slapped down for overstepping. I still didn't move back into the penthouse. Let it sit empty, let them wonder why I wasn't taking advantage of my legal victory. Instead, I focused on work. Real work. I had 3 projects in development, software solutions for logistics companies that would streamline supply chain management, the kind of boring, unsexy technology that made the modern world function and generated steady, reliable income. I took meetings over video calls, never showing my location. I communicated with my small team, all remote contractors, through encrypted channels. To them, I was just Dom, the founder who preferred to work behind the scenes while they handled client relations. None of them knew about Sienna. None of them knew about the Whitmores. This was my real life, the one I'd built with patience and skill, the one that existed completely independent of social status or family legacy. 2 weeks after the gala, Victoria sent another update. Whitmore Industries board meeting tomorrow. Ari is pushing to invalidate Sienna's shares, claiming they should revert to the company rather than transfer to you. Thought you'd want to know. I read the message 3 times. Whitmore Industries was Richard's crown jewel, a commercial real estate development company that owned half the office buildings in Ashford Heights. Sienna had inherited 15% of the company when she turned 25, shares that her grandfather had set aside for her. 15% wasn't enough to control the company, but it was enough to matter, enough to influence major decisions, enough to make me a voice at the table. Richard wanted to erase that voice before I ever had a chance to use it. I pulled up the corporate bylaws, documents Victoria had sent me weeks ago, read through them carefully, looking for leverage points, weaknesses, opportunities. And I found one. A clause buried in Section 7, Paragraph 12. Any shareholder with more than 10% ownership had the right to call for an independent audit of company finances if they had reasonable cause to suspect irregularities. Reasonable cause. I thought about the investigators Richard had hired, the money he was throwing at lawyers, the contempt fine he'd paid without blinking. Where was all that cash coming from? I opened a new encrypted message to Victoria. I want to exercise my right to call for an audit of Whitmore Industries. Can we make that happen? Her response came back within minutes. Absolutely. But Dominic, this will make them furious. Are you ready for that? I stared at the message, thought about Sienna's letter, her trust in me, her belief that I was stronger than I thought. Then I typed, "Let them be furious. I'm done being silent." I hit send and sat back, watching the harbor lights begin to flicker on as evening approached. The disappearing act was over. Now came the reckoning. The audit request hit Whitmore Industries like an earthquake nobody saw coming. Victoria filed the paperwork on a Tuesday morning, and by Tuesday afternoon, my phone, the one I'd kept active for essential business, started receiving voicemails I never answered. Richard's voice, tight with barely controlled rage. "You have no right to interfere with my company. This is harassment, pure and simple. My lawyers will be in touch." Eleanor, icier. "This pathetic attempt at relevance won't work, Dominic. You're embarrassing yourself." Even Sienna's Aunt Margaret, who I'd met exactly twice. "How dare you disrespect this family after everything we've done for you?" I listened to each message once, saved them to a folder, and deleted them from my phone. Let them scream into the void. I had work to do. Victoria called that evening through our encrypted line. "The board is in chaos," she reported, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "Richard tried to block the audit, but the bylaws are clear. You have every legal right to request one." "How long until it starts?" "The independent firm Kelton & Associates will begin next Monday. They're extremely thorough. This won't be a quick rubber stamp." Good. "Dominic, I have to ask, what are you expecting them to find?" I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the harbor. A container ship was being unloaded. Massive cranes moving with mechanical precision. I'm not sure yet. But Richard's reaction tells me there's something worth hiding. Over the next week, I watched from a distance as Whitmore Industries began to unravel from the inside. Victoria had a contact on the administrative staff, someone who'd worked there for 20 years and had no love for Richard's management style. The information came in fragments, carefully leaked emails and meeting notes. Thursday, emergency board meeting called. Richard spent 2 hours trying to convince the other board members that the audit was unnecessary, a waste of company resources. 3 of the 7 members disagreed. The audit would proceed. Friday, heated argument between Richard and the company's CFO, a woman named Patricia Orozco. She'd been with Whitmore Industries for 15 years, and according to the leaked email, she was demanding to see certain financial records that Richard had been keeping locked in his personal office. Saturday, Patricia Orozco submitted her resignation, effective immediately. No explanation given publicly, but the internal memo Victoria obtained told a different story. I can no longer in good conscience continue in my role given the financial irregularities I've discovered. That last one made me sit up straight. I sent Victoria a message. Can we talk to Patricia Orozco? Already on it. She's agreed to meet with me tomorrow, off the record. Sunday evening, Victoria called with an update that changed everything. Patricia's willing to testify if it comes to that, Victoria said without preamble. She found discrepancies in the books going back 3 years. Money moving between Whitmore Industries and several shell companies, labeled as consulting fees and development costs. How much money? $8 million. Maybe more. She didn't have access to all the records, but what she saw was enough to make her walk away from a 6-figure salary. I felt my pulse quicken. Where did the money go? That's the interesting part. The shell companies trace back to personal accounts, Richard's accounts, and Colton's. Colton Whitmore, Sienna's older brother. I'd met him even less frequently than Marcus. He worked in the business, nominally as VP of Development. But Sienna had once mentioned that he mostly just collected a paycheck while their father did the real work. Apparently, he'd been collecting more than just a paycheck. They were embezzling from their own company, I said slowly. That's what it looks like. Patricia said Richard justified it as executive compensation, but it was never approved by the board and never reported properly to shareholders. Including Sienna. Victoria confirmed. She owned 15% of that company, and they were siphoning off profits that should have been distributed to all shareholders. I stood up and walked to the window. The harbor was dark tonight, just a few security lights dotting the industrial landscape. How much would Sienna's share have been? If the money had been distributed properly? Rough estimate, based on what Patricia provided, probably $1.2 million over 3 years. $1.2 million. Stolen from his own daughter. There's more, Victoria continued. Some of those shell companies were used to purchase properties at inflated prices. Properties that Whitmore Industries then bought from the shell companies at even higher prices. Basically, Richard was selling real estate to himself, using company money, and pocketing the difference. That's fraud. Yes, it is. I thought about Richard's face at the gala, the righteous indignation as he called me a gold digger, the way he'd accused me of using Sienna for money, all while he was systematically stealing from her. The irony was almost poetic. What happens now? I asked. Kelton and Associates will find this, probably within the first week of their audit. Once they do, they're legally obligated to report it. The board will have to take action, and if the amounts are as large as Patricia suspects, criminal charges are likely. And my role in all this? You called for the audit as a concerned shareholder. That's it. You didn't make accusations, didn't leak information, you simply exercised your legal rights. Everything that happens after that is on Richard and Colton. I smiled, though there was no humor in it. They did this to themselves. Yes, they did. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my loft for a long time. I thought about Sienna, about how she'd fought to maintain independence from her family's money and influence, how she'd created a life that was hers, not theirs. And all the while, her own father had been stealing from her. She would have been devastated. But she also would have wanted justice. The following Monday, Kelton and Associates arrived at Whitmore Industries headquarters with boxes of equipment and a team of forensic accountants. Victoria's contact reported that Richard looked physically ill when they walked through the door. By Wednesday, the auditors had found the first shell company. By Friday, they'd traced $2 million in unauthorized transfers. The board called an emergency meeting for Monday morning. Richard was not invited to attend. I watched it all unfold from my loft, staying invisible, staying silent. Every day brought new revelations, new cracks in the facade Richard had built. The local business journal started asking questions. Reporters who'd gotten tips about unusual activity at Whitmore Industries. Richard tried to control the narrative, issuing statements about routine audits and standard corporate procedures, but his voice sounded strained in the recordings, desperate in a way I'd never heard before. Eleanor went silent entirely. No more voicemails, no more messages through intermediaries. Victoria suspected she was meeting with divorce attorneys, protecting her own assets before the inevitable collapse. Colton made one public appearance, a disastrous interview with a local business podcast where he stumbled through questions about his role in the company. "I just approved what my father recommended," he said at one point. "I trusted his judgment." The host, smelling blood, pressed harder. "So you signed off on transactions without reviewing them?" "I mean, I reviewed them, but you didn't understand them?" "That's not what I said." The interview ended abruptly, and the podcast host later tweeted, "Fascinating conversation with Colton Whitmore today. Nothing builds investor confidence like an executive who doesn't know what he's signing." I listened to the podcast twice, not out of pleasure but out of a kind of distant curiosity. These were the people who'd called me worthless, who'd publicly humiliated me. And now they were imploding, not because I'd attacked them, but because I'd simply shined a light on what they'd been doing in the shadows. Victoria sent me an update on day 12 of the audit. Patricia Orozco has agreed to cooperate fully with investigators. She's providing documentation of everything she found. Richard's lawyer tried to block it, claiming attorney-client privilege, but Patricia never signed an NDA, and she's not bound by corporate confidentiality regarding illegal activity. "How was Richard responding?" I asked. "Badly. He showed up at Patricia's house last night. Her husband called the police. There's now a restraining order." I closed my eyes. Richard Whitmore, pillar of the community, reduced to harassing former employees at their homes. The fall was happening faster than I'd anticipated. "The board is meeting again tomorrow," Victoria continued. "Word is they're voting on whether to remove Richard as CEO and refer the matter to law enforcement." Will they do it? The evidence is overwhelming. If they don't act, they could be held liable as well. Self-preservation is a powerful motivator. That night, I received one more message. Not from Victoria, but from Marcus, Sienna's cousin. He'd somehow gotten my encrypted email address, probably through persistence and technical skill I hadn't given him credit for. The subject line read, "I'm sorry." The message itself was brief. I didn't know what my uncle was doing. None of us did. Or maybe we didn't want to know. Sienna deserved better than this family. You deserved better than what they did to you at the gala. I know you probably won't respond to this, but I wanted you to know that some of us see the truth now. Whatever happens next, I hope you find peace. I read it 3 times, then archived it without responding. Marcus seemed genuine, but trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not yet. The next morning, the vote came down. 7 board members, 5 votes to remove Richard Whitmore as CEO, effective immediately. The company issued a terse statement about leadership changes and ongoing internal reviews. The Business Journal ran it as their top story. By afternoon, the story had grown. Someone, probably Patricia or another insider, had leaked details about the embezzlement to a reporter. $8 million in unauthorized transfers. Properties bought and sold through shell companies. A father stealing from his own daughter's inheritance. The headlines were brutal. Whitmore Industries, CEO ousted amid fraud allegations. Real estate magnate under investigation for embezzlement. Family business, family theft inside the Whitmore scandal. I read them all, sitting at my desk with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a hollow kind of vindication. They'd called me a parasite, a gold digger, someone who'd used Sienna for money. And all along, they were the ones who couldn't see past wealth and status, who'd valued money over integrity, appearance over truth. I opened Sienna's letter again, the one she'd written knowing her family would turn on me. "Don't let them bully you, Dominic. Stand your ground." I had. Not with anger or aggression, but with patience and truth. And now the whole city could see what I'd known all along. They weren't better than me. They were worse. The morning after Richard's removal, I woke to find 17 new articles about the Whitmore scandal. The story had grown beyond local business news and entered the realm of public fascination. Wealthy family brought down by greed, it was the kind of narrative that wrote itself. I made coffee and settled at my desk, pulling up the most detailed piece from the Ashford Tribune's investigative team. They'd somehow obtained internal documents, likely from Patricia or another disgusted former employee, and the revelations were even worse than I'd anticipated. Richard hadn't just embezzled from Whitmore Industries. He'd used company resources to fund personal projects, including a vacation home in the mountains that was somehow listed as a corporate retreat, despite never hosting a single company event. He'd hired family friends through no-bid contracts, paying them inflated rates for minimal work. He'd even redirected funds from a charitable foundation the company sponsored, money meant for affordable housing development, into his personal investment accounts. The article quoted an anonymous board member, "We trusted Richard completely. He built this company from the ground up. The idea that he would betray that trust, betray his own shareholders, including his daughter, it's unconscionable." His daughter, Sienna's name appeared multiple times in the article, always with the notation that she'd passed away earlier this year. The reporters had done their homework. They'd found the will, the fact that I was the primary beneficiary, the public scene at the gala where Richard had called me a gold digger. The irony wasn't lost on them or their readers. One comment under the online article read, "So let me get this straight. The father calls his son-in-law a gold digger while literally stealing millions from his own daughter? That's next-level projection." Another, "I was at that gala. Watched the whole thing. The way they humiliated that man in front of everyone. Turns out he was the only honest person in the room." I closed the browser. Public opinion was shifting. But that wasn't why I'd started this. I'd done it because Sienna had trusted me to stand up for what was right, and because Richard and Eleanor needed to face consequences for their actions. Victoria called mid-morning with news that made everything more complicated. "The prosecutors are officially investigating," she said. "They've subpoenaed all of Whitmore Industries' financial records for the past 5 years. Richard's personal accounts, too." "How long until charges are filed?" "Weeks, maybe months. White-collar cases take time to build. But Dominic, there's something else. They want to interview you." I set down my coffee. "Why?" "You're a major shareholder and the one who called for the audit. They need to establish your knowledge of the situation, make sure you weren't complicit in any way." "I wasn't." "I know that, and they'll figure that out quickly. But you need to come out of hiding for this. No more encrypted emails and silence. You'll have to sit down with prosecutors and answer questions." I thought about it. The disappearing act had served its purpose. Richard and his family had imploded, exactly as I'd anticipated, destroyed by their own corruption. But Victoria was right. Continuing to hide would only raise suspicions about my motives. "Set up the meeting," I said, "but on my terms, your office, not theirs. And I want everything documented." "Agreed." The interview happened 3 days later. 2 prosecutors, both women in their 40s, who radiated competence and skepticism in equal measure. They sat across from me in Victoria's conference room with recording equipment and thick folders of documents. The lead prosecutor, Sandra Reeves, got straight to it. "Mr. Shaw, can you walk us through your relationship with Whitmore Industries?" I did, explaining that I'd inherited 15% of the company through Sienna's estate, that I'd had no involvement in day-to-day operations, no knowledge of the company's finances beyond what was disclosed in annual shareholder reports. "Why did you call for an audit?" the second prosecutor, Jennifer Park, asked. "Because Richard Whitmore fought very hard to prevent me from inheriting those shares. He claimed I was a gold digger, someone who'd married his daughter for money. His reaction seemed disproportionate unless there was something he was trying to hide." "So this was personal?" Sandra asked. "It was about protecting my wife's legacy," I corrected. "Sienna trusted me with her estate. I owed it to her to make sure everything was handled properly." They asked about my finances, my background, my knowledge of Richard's business practices. I answered everything honestly, holding nothing back. I showed them documentation of my own company, Quantum Dynamics, the patents and investments that proved I'd never needed Whitmore money. Jennifer's eyebrows rose when she saw the numbers. "You're independently wealthy." "Yes." And you never told the Whitmores? It wasn't their business. I married Sienna, not her bank account. Sandra leaned back, exchanging a glance with Jennifer. That must have made the accusations at the gala particularly galling. It made them ironic, I said quietly. The interview lasted 2 hours. By the end, both prosecutors seemed satisfied that I'd had no involvement in Richard's schemes. I was a victim, if anything, someone whose inheritance had been diminished by embezzlement. As they packed up their equipment, Sandra paused. For what it's worth, Mr. Shaw, I think you showed remarkable restraint. A lot of people in your position would have gone public, made this messy and personal. I'm not interested in revenge, I said. Just justice. She nodded. You'll get it. Richard Whitmore is going to face serious charges. Prison time is likely. After they left, Victoria poured us both coffee and sat across from me. You did well. They believe you. Because I told the truth. Not everyone does, even when it's in their best interest. She sipped her coffee. The probate case is moving forward too. With Richard facing criminal charges, his lawyers have stopped fighting the will. You'll have full access to all of Sienna's assets within the month. $20 million. Properties, investments, shares in a company that was now being restructured under new leadership. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it just felt like the end of something painful. There's one more thing, Victoria said, sliding a document across the table. The new board at Whitmore Industries wants to meet with you. They're offering you a seat. I looked at the formal invitation, embossed letterhead, and careful legal language. They wanted me involved in rebuilding the company, restoring trust with shareholders and the community. What do you think? I asked. Victoria considered. I think they're trying to distance themselves from Richard's legacy. Having you on the board, the wrong son-in-law who exposed the corruption, that's good optics. But it's also a legitimate opportunity. You could help make sure this never happens again. I thought about Sienna, about how much she'd struggled with her family's business practices. She'd wanted Whitmore Industries to be better, to actually serve the community instead of just extracting wealth from it. Maybe this was how I could honor that. Tell them I'll attend the meeting, I said, but I'm not committing to anything until I hear their plans. Victoria smiled. I'll set it up. That night I stood on my balcony overlooking the harbor. The air was cool, carrying the salt smell of the ocean and the distant sounds of the city. Somewhere out there, Richard Whitmore was probably in his mansion, surrounded by lawyers, watching his empire crumble. Eleanor was likely doing the same, trying to salvage what she could from the wreckage. And Colton, poor foolish Colton, was probably just now realizing that following his father blindly had destroyed his own future. I didn't feel sorry for them. They'd made their choices, prioritized wealth and status over integrity and family. Now they were facing consequences. But I didn't feel triumphant either. I just felt tired and ready for this chapter to close. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Marcus again. I know you're not responding, but I wanted you to know the family's falling apart. Mom and Dad are barely speaking. Uncle Richard's drinking himself into oblivion. And I finally understand why Sienna kept you separate from all of us. You were the only real thing in her life. Thank you for fighting for her. I read it twice, then saved it to a folder I'd labeled after, messages to consider responding to once everything's settled. Maybe Marcus deserved a response. Maybe he was genuinely different from the rest of them. But not yet, not while everything was still in motion. I deleted the notification and went back inside, back to my desk and my work. Tomorrow I'd meet with the Whitmore Industries board. Next week the prosecutors would likely file formal charges against Richard. And through it all I'd keep doing what I'd always done, building things quietly, working with integrity, letting my actions speak louder than any words could. Sienna had seen that in me, had loved that about me. And now, finally, everyone else could see it too. 3 weeks after the prosecutor's interview, I was working late at the loft when the building's security system chimed. Someone was at the main entrance, pressing the call button for my unit. I pulled up the camera feed on my monitor. The image was grainy but clear enough. Eleanor Whitmore stood in the lobby, wrapped in a long coat despite the mild evening. Her hair was pulled back severely, and even through the low-resolution camera I could see the exhaustion in her posture. She pressed the button again, then looked directly at the camera. "Dominic, I know you're there. Please, I just need 5 minutes." I sat back, debating. Every instinct told me to ignore her. to let her stand there until she gave up and left. She'd earned nothing from me, certainly not my time or attention. But curiosity won out. I pressed the intercom button. "What do you want, Eleanor?" Her shoulders sagged with what looked like relief. "To talk. Just talk, please." Against my better judgment, I buzzed her in. She emerged from the elevator looking smaller than I remembered. Eleanor Whitmore had always carried herself with an imperious confidence, the bearing of someone who'd never questioned their place in the world. That confidence was gone now, stripped away by scandal and consequences. I didn't invite her to sit, just stood by the window, arms crossed, waiting. She looked around the loft, taking in the minimalist furniture, the harbor view, the bank of monitors on my desk, showing code and financial dashboards. "This is where you've been living." "One of the places, yes." "It's nice, quiet." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Sienna mentioned once that you had a private workspace." I didn't understand what she meant. "You never asked." Eleanor flinched. "No, I didn't." She moved closer, though still maintaining careful distance. "I came to apologize." I said nothing. "What we did at the gala, what Richard said, what I said, it was cruel and unfair. You didn't deserve that." "No, I didn't." She looked down at her hands. I noticed for the first time that she wasn't wearing her wedding ring. I've spent 3 weeks watching everything fall apart. The company, our reputation, my marriage, Richard's facing federal charges, Colton's in therapy, our friends won't return calls. I'm aware. And through all of it I kept thinking about that night. The look on your face when we called you a gold digger. Her voice cracked slightly. You didn't even defend yourself, you just left. What was I supposed to say? You'd already decided who I was. Eleanor nodded slowly. We had. From the moment Sienna brought you home, we decided you weren't good enough. You didn't come from the right family, didn't have the right connections. Richard ran a background check before your engagement and found student loans, modest income. He was convinced you were after her money, and you agreed with him. I did. She finally looked up, meeting my eyes. I was wrong about everything. I moved to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, didn't offer her one. Why are you really here, Eleanor? She took a breath. Because my daughter loved you, more than she ever loved anyone, including us. And I never understood why until now. And now? Now I've seen what you built. Not just this place or your company, though that's impressive. I've seen how you handled everything. You could have destroyed us publicly, dragged us through the media, made this personal and vicious. But you didn't. You just told the truth and let the consequences unfold. That's not mercy, Eleanor. That's just efficiency. Maybe. She moved closer to the window, looking out at the harbor. Sienna used to talk about integrity, about building a life that meant something beyond money and status. Richard and I thought she was being naive, that she'd grow out of it. We never realized she'd found someone who actually lived that way. The words should have meant something. Maybe 6 months ago they would have. But standing there, looking at this woman who'd spent years making me feel inadequate, I felt only emptiness. If you're looking for forgiveness, I can't give you that, I said quietly. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Eleanor nodded. I understand. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I see now what Sienna saw. And I'm sorry we wasted so much time being blind. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Richard's attorney is trying to work out a plea deal. He'll likely serve time, several years at least. Colton's cooperating with prosecutors to avoid charges himself, and I've filed for divorce. I know. Of course she did. Nothing happened in this case without Victoria keeping me informed. The family's finished, Eleanor said softly. Everything Richard built, everything we were, it's gone. And the worst part is knowing we did it to ourselves. After she left, I stood at the window for a long time. A cargo ship was making its way into the harbor, running lights cutting through the darkness. Steady, purposeful, unbothered by the human drama playing out on shore. I thought about Eleanor's apology, about whether it changed anything. It didn't erase the humiliation of the gala or the years of subtle condescension. It didn't bring Sienna back or undo the pain her family had caused. But it was something. An acknowledgement. A crack in the armor of willful blindness they'd worn for so long. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder of saved messages. Found the one from Marcus. Read it again. Then I typed a response. Thank you for reaching out. I appreciate knowing that someone in the family understands. I'm not ready for regular contact yet, but I wanted you to know your messages mattered. I hit send before I could reconsider. Then I went to my desk drawer, the one where I'd kept a few of Sienna's things. A photo of us from our honeymoon in Portugal. A handwritten note she'd left on my desk once. Proud of you, always. A pressed flower from the bouquet I'd given her on our first anniversary. I'd been avoiding this drawer, couldn't bear to open it, but tonight, with Eleanor's apology still echoing in the quiet loft, I pulled out the photo and set it on my desk where I could see it. Sienna smiled out at me, windblown and happy, the Atlantic Ocean behind her. I'd taken the shot on a clifftop in Lagos, both of us sunburned and exhausted from hiking. I stood my ground, I told the photo quietly, just like you asked. The image didn't answer, of course, but sitting there in the darkness with just the harbor lights and the glow from my monitors, I felt something shift. Not closure, exactly, but the beginning of it. Eleanor's apology wouldn't fix everything. Nothing could. But it was a start towards something resembling peace. And maybe that was enough for now. The federal indictment came down on a Thursday morning. 43 pages of detailed charges that read like a masterclass in corporate fraud. I was sitting in Victoria's office when the news broke, both of us watching the live press conference from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Sandra Reeves stood at the podium, flanked by FBI agents and state prosecutors. Her voice was measured, professional, devastating. Today, we are announcing charges against Richard Whitmore, former CEO of Whitmore Industries, and his son, Colton Whitmore. The charges include wire fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, and conspiracy to defraud shareholders. The camera flashes were constant, reporters shouting questions over each other. Mr. Whitmore systematically diverted more than $8 million from Whitmore Industries over a 5-year period, Sandra continued. He used shell companies to disguise these transfers, fraudulent invoices for services never rendered, and real estate transactions designed to enrich himself at the company's expense. She detailed the scheme methodically, the vacation property listed as a corporate retreat, the consulting contracts awarded to friends and family members, the charitable foundation funds redirected to personal accounts. Perhaps most egregiously, Sandra said, her voice hardening, Mr. Whitmore stole from his own daughter's inheritance. Sienna Whitmore owned 15% of the company and was entitled to her share of profits. Instead, those profits were siphoned into her father's accounts. She died, never knowing she'd been robbed by her own family. Victoria glanced at me. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, hearing Sienna's name in a federal indictment made everything suddenly, painfully real. Colton Whitmore has agreed to cooperate with our investigation in exchange for reduced charges, Sandra continued. His testimony will be crucial in establishing the full scope of this conspiracy. The press conference lasted 20 minutes. By the time it ended, every major news outlet in the state was running the story. Within hours, it had gone national. My phone started ringing. Reporters who'd somehow gotten my number. Distant acquaintances seeking comment. Even a producer from a true crime podcast wanting to interview me. I ignored them all. Victoria fielded the media requests with practiced efficiency. Mr. Shaw is focused on honoring his late wife's memory and has no comment at this time. But the story grew anyway, fed by leaked documents and public records. The business journals ran deep analyses of how the fraud had gone undetected for so long. The local news interviewed former Whitmore Industries employees who spoke about the culture of fear Richard had created, how questioning his decisions meant risking your job. Someone found footage from the charity gala, the night Richard had publicly humiliated me. It circulated on social media with new context. People who'd been there that night now mortified by their silence. One former guest posted, "I watched this happen and said nothing. I let them destroy this man because I assumed the rich family knew what they were talking about. I'm ashamed of my cowardice." The narrative had completely flipped. I was no longer the gold digger. I was the victim who'd quietly fought back. The man who'd honored his wife's memory by exposing her father's corruption. It should have felt vindicating. Instead, it just felt exhausting. A week after the indictment, Victoria called with unexpected news. The FBI found something else during their investigation. Something you need to know about. I was at the loft, taking a rare afternoon away from work. What did they find? Evidence that Richard tried to contest Sienna's will through fraudulent means. He hired a forensic psychiatrist to evaluate her mental state posthumously, trying to prove she wasn't competent when she made you the beneficiary. My grip tightened on the phone. He did what? The psychiatrist refused to provide the opinion Richard wanted, said there was no evidence of diminished capacity. So Richard shopped around until he found someone willing to write a report suggesting Sienna might have been unduly influenced. That's malpractice. It's also fraud, and it's now part of the federal case. The FBI seized Richard's emails. There's a paper trail of him explicitly asking doctors to create false evidence. I closed my eyes, processing this. Richard hadn't just stolen from Sienna. He'd tried to destroy her final wishes, tried to paint her as incompetent so he could invalidate her trust in me. There's more, Victoria said quietly. They found emails between Richard and Eleanor from right after Sienna died. They were planning how to cut you out of everything before the funeral had even happened. She read me excerpts. Cold, calculating messages about legal strategies and public relations. Eleanor suggesting they claim I'd isolated Sienna from her family. Richard proposing they freeze the estate in probate until I gave up and accepted a settlement. They'd been planning my destruction while I'd been planning Sienna's memorial service. The prosecutors want to know if you want this included in their case, Victoria said. It demonstrates pattern of behavior, consciousness of guilt. But it would also make everything more public, more painful. I stood up, walked to the window. The harbor was busy today. Ships moving in carefully choreographed patterns, everyone knowing their role. Include it, I said finally. All of it. Sienna deserves the whole truth to come out. Are you sure this will be in court documents, public record? I'm sure. The amended indictment dropped 3 days later, now including charges related to Richard's attempts to defraud me of my inheritance. The media coverage intensified. Legal analysts called it one of the most brazen cases of family betrayal they'd seen. Richard's attorney issued a statement claiming his client had been operating under emotional distress following his daughter's death. The response from legal experts was unanimous. Grief doesn't excuse fraud. The preliminary hearing was set for 6 weeks out. Victoria warned me I'd likely be called to testify, to establish the timeline of events and authenticate evidence. I agreed without hesitation. But before the hearing could happen, something unexpected occurred. Marcus Whitmore went public. He gave an interview to the Ashford Tribune's investigative team, on the record, using his real name. In it, he detailed years of watching his Uncle Richard's unethical behavior, the pressure on family members to stay silent, the culture of valuing wealth over integrity. Dominic Shaw was exactly what our family needed, Marcus said in the interview. Someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated. Someone who actually loved Sienna for who she was, not what she represented. And we treated him like garbage because he threatened our comfortable lives. The article quoted him extensively about the gala, about watching me be humiliated and feeling ashamed of his own silence. About realizing in the weeks since that everything Richard and Eleanor had said about me was projection, accusing me of the very greed that had consumed them. I read the interview 3 times, sitting in the early morning quiet of the loft. Marcus had risked his relationship with what remained of his family to tell the truth. That took courage. This time, I didn't hesitate. I sent him a message. Thank you for speaking up. It means more than you know. When things settle, I'd like to talk. His response came within minutes. Anytime. Sienna would be proud of you. I set the phone down and looked at her photo on my desk. The one from Portugal, her smile, bright and real. The truth was out now. All of it. The fraud, the betrayal, the systematic destruction of everything Richard and Eleanor had claimed to value. And through it all, Sienna's trust in me had been vindicated. She'd known I would stand my ground. She'd known I had the strength to see this through. Now the whole world knew it too. The boardroom at Whitmore Industries looked different than I'd imagined. Not the imposing old money space I'd expected, but a modern conference room with glass walls and clean lines. The new interim CEO, a woman named Rachel Kimura, brought in from outside the family, had already started changing the culture. She stood when I entered, extending her hand. Mr. Shaw, thank you for coming. The board members were already seated, 7 faces I'd only seen in corporate filings and news articles. They watched me with a mixture of curiosity and caution as I took the empty seat at the table. Rachel didn't waste time. We asked you here because Whitmore Industries is at a crossroads. The fraud investigation has damaged our reputation severely. We've lost clients, investors are nervous, and our employees are questioning whether this company has a future. She slid a folder across the table to me. We are proposing a complete restructuring. New leadership, transparent financial practices, an independent ethics board. But we need shareholders who believe in that vision to make it work. I opened the folder. Inside was a formal offer to join the board of directors, along with detailed plans for reforming the company's practices. Everything Sienna had wanted Whitmore Industries to be: ethical, community-focused, transparent. Why me? I asked, looking up. An older board member, Thomas Greenwich, spoke up. Because you exposed the rot when you could have just walked away with your inheritance. That shows integrity. And frankly, we need someone the public trusts right now. You also own 15% of this company, Rachel added. That makes you our second largest shareholder. You have every right to help shape its future. I thought about Richard sitting in this same room, making decisions that enriched himself at everyone else's expense. About Sienna's frustration with the family business, her dreams of what it could become. I'll join the board on 3 conditions, I said. First, full financial transparency. Every transaction, every contract, open to shareholder review. Second, we establish a foundation in Sienna's name, funded by company profits, focused on affordable housing development. The real kind, not the fake charity Richard used for tax breaks. Rachel nodded. And third? No family members in executive positions for at least 5 years. This company needs to prove it can succeed on merit, not nepotism. Thomas glanced at the other board members. Colton's already resigned. That's not an issue. Then we have an agreement. The formal vote happened quickly. 7 votes in favor, 0 against. I was now a director of Whitmore Industries, the company that had once viewed me as a parasite. After the meeting, Rachel walked me out. I read about what happened at the gala, what they said to you. Ancient history. Maybe, but I want you to know this board isn't like that. We're here to build something legitimate. I believed her. Rachel had a reputation for turning around troubled companies, for valuing substance over appearances. She was exactly what Whitmore Industries needed. That evening, I returned to the loft and drafted a statement for Victoria to release to the media. Short, simple, focusing on the future rather than the past. I'm honored to join the Whitmore Industries board and help build a company that reflects integrity and community service. This is what Sienna always envisioned, and I'm committed to making that vision real. The statement went out the next morning. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Business analysts called it a smart move, bringing in someone with both a personal stake and a proven track record of ethical business practices. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. Marcus sent me a photo. He was standing in front of Whitmore Industries headquarters, holding a coffee cup and smiling. The text read, "First day as a junior analyst. Rachel hired me based on merit, not my name. Starting at the bottom like I should have years ago. Thanks for showing me what integrity looks like." I smiled and saved the photo. 2 months later, Richard's trial began. I sat in the courtroom as prosecutors laid out the evidence methodically, devastatingly. Former employees testified about the culture of fear. Forensic accountants walked through the shell companies and fraudulent transactions. Patricia Orozco's testimony was particularly damning, her quiet professionalism making Richard's defense look desperate. Colton testified too, detailing how his father had manipulated him into signing off on illegal transactions. He looked hollow, broken, nothing like the arrogant VP who'd once dismissed my contributions. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on all counts. Richard was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The judge's statement was scathing. You betrayed your shareholders, your employees, your community, and most egregiously, your own daughter. The sentence reflects the breadth of that betrayal. Eleanor wasn't charged. The prosecutors determined she'd been willfully ignorant but not actively complicit. She'd already lost everything that mattered to her anyway: her marriage, her social standing, her reputation. I didn't attend the sentencing. Victoria represented my interests, and that was enough. I had no desire to watch Richard's final humiliation. Instead, I spent that day at the cemetery where Sienna was buried. I hadn't visited in months, couldn't bear it. But now, with everything finally settled, I needed to. Her headstone was simple, elegant. Just her name, her dates, and the inscription I'd chosen. She saw the best in everyone. I sat on the grass beside her grave and talked to her like I used to. Told her about the board position, about the foundation we were creating in her name, about Marcus finding his own path. "You were right," I said quietly. "I was stronger than I thought. But I couldn't have done this without knowing you believed in me." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of fresh flowers someone had left nearby. I stayed until sunset, watching the light fade across the cemetery. Then I drove back to Harborside, to the loft that had been my refuge through everything. The harbor was calm that night, ships resting at anchor, the city lights reflecting off still water. I stood at my window with a glass of wine, thinking about how far I'd come from that rainy night when Eleanor and Richard had thrown me out. They'd tried to destroy me. Instead, they'd destroyed themselves. And I'd honored Sienna's memory by standing my ground, by choosing integrity over revenge, truth over anger. My phone buzzed. A message from Rachel: "Board meeting next week. We're voting on the first grants for the Sienna Whitmore Foundation. Thought you'd want to be there." I typed back, "I'll be there." Then I set the phone down and returned to the window, to the quiet peace of my harbor view. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibility, of new beginnings, of a future built on the foundation Sienna and I had created together. They'd called me a gold digger, a parasite, someone who didn't belong. But in the end, I was the one who'd shown them what real worth looked like. And I'd done it without saying a word. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.